At the end of the first millennium around 1000 AD, China was definitively the most powerful country in the world. More than a third of the world lived within his borders. Its technology was the most advanced in existence and its economy accounted for an astronomical 50% of the world's GDP. The West paled in comparison to China, but eventually Europe arose from its dark ages, the importance of China diminished, and the West came to rule the world. Today, that is still largely the case. But China is rising again. In 1978, China had a GDP of only $200 billion, only about 4% of the world's GDP. But nowadays that GDP has risen to $11 trillion and accounts for 15% of all economic activity in the world. This economic renaissance of the last 40 years is largely thanks to one industry, manufacturing. We've come to accept that China is the world's factory, but it wasn't always this way. In the early 20th century, goods were often just produced right where they were sold. America made American goods, Europe made European goods. It wasn't until cheap worldwide shipping became available that the production side of a company could be relocated to the other side of the world. But why did China win? How did this country become the manufacturing giant it is today? The People's Republic of China was formed in 1949, under the leadership of Mao Zedong. Chairman Mao is credited with modernizing the country and helping to elevate it to a world power, in part by improving education, promoting women's rights, developing a better healthcare system and laying the groundwork for a more industrialized economy. However, in the later half of his rule in the 1970s, China was still primarily an impoverished nation, partially as a result of political turmoil and the government's mismanagement of the economy. Yet today, only 40 years later, China is the world's second largest economy. The top manufacturing and trading nation, and one of the most influential investors in countries throughout the world. China has replaced America as the world's top factory producer and they're actually on track to potentially surpass the economy of the United States, to take the top economic position in the world. China is truly the factory of our world, with over 47% of its exports going to Asian countries, 22% going to America, 19% to Europe and about 4% to both Africa and Latin America. In 1978, 2 years after the death of Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping became the paramount leader of the People's Republic of China. Under this new era of leadership, economic reforms were put into place that took China in a completely new direction. He quickly visited Bangkok, Singapore, and other flourishing Asian cities and was convinced that in order to succeed, China needed to open itself up to the outside world. At least to an extent he gave people control their farms, privatized business, and most importantly, allowed foreign investment in the country. For the first time in decades, he opened up 4 special economic zones with tax incentives and exemption from the oversight that the rest of the country saw on its investments and trade activity. These 4 zones were essentially the free market portions of China, but none was more successful than this one, Shenzhen, in the Guangdong province. Before its designation as a special economic zone in 1980, Shenzhen was a tiny town with about 30,000 inhabitants. But today, that's grown to nearly 18 million people. That means that its size rivals that of New York and London. It's believed that Shenzhen might have been the single fastest growing city in human history. Today, Shenzhen is the electronics manufacturing capital of the world. Apple, Samsung, Microsoft, Sony, Canon, they all manufacture products here in Shenzhen. In fact, 90% of the world's electronics are made at least in parts in this city. In 1972, the US imported only $4.7 million worth of goods from China. By 1984, the US was China's third largest trading partner, but China still only represents less than 2% of all American imports. Since 1985, America's trade with China has increased well over 7,000%. And in 2015, China passed Canada as America's largest trade partner. Also, China doesn't charge taxes on export, and the US doesn't charge taxes on imports. But it's one of several factors that had helped to make China indisputable manufacturing hub of the world. Everything just cost less in China, so labor cost less too. Where a factory in the United States might pay upwards of $10 to $15 an hour, a Chinese laborers would happily accept $3 or $4 an hour in Shenzhen. But China isn't cheap entirely naturally. China has artificially depressed the value of their currency up until 2005. The Chinese government just said that the exchange rate was 8 yuan and 27 fen per dollar, and that was that. They then went a few years allowing it to increase in value within a margin. But in 2008, they pegged its value again to make Chinese exports more attractive during the financial crisis. Nowadays, the government just picks an exchange rate daily and lets the currency fluctuate from it by up to 2%. This just makes it so easy for Western companies to buy more by paying less. But there is another reason why production costs have been historically low in China. The manufacturing boom in China was amplified by the lack of restrictions and regulations that were common in the West. These included lax standards in regards to child labor, health and safety, environment protections, and wage and hour laws. Not putting an emphasis on these types of regulations helped to lower costs and boost the bottom line. However, it meant that for many years, factory workers, including children, were working 16 hours a day, 28 days a month in unsafe conditions. Some employers even withheld paychecks until the end of the year to ensure their workers didn't quit. Also, in a factory of Foxconn, one of the Apple's contract manufacturer, installed nets to prevent workers from jumping off the building as they were protesting against the working conditions. There were environmental consequences as well. As of 2018, 22 of the world's top 50 polluted cities are located in China. Infrastructure development is the key factor in economic growth of any country. As China started to grow economically, the central, as well as the local government, began to invest heavily in infrastructure projects. China's infrastructure projects helped to make transportation efficient and fast for people as well as goods. This was an indirect help for economy to grow at much faster rate. In 1978, the total highway length in China was nearly 12 million kilometers. In 2018, it was 405 million kilometers. So highway length increased 44 times in the last 40 years. Similarly, the railway length in 1978 was 50,000 kilometers. In 2018, it increased to 130,000 kilometers. China also developed road connectivity with rural areas in the last decade for easy rotation of agricultural goods. China is not only developing its conventional infrastructure like transportation, energy sources, water conservancy, but they are also trying to develop modern infrastructure like 5G, artificial intelligence, industrial internet and fiber optic communication. Chinese labor cost has increased tremendously in all these years, and due to this, China is no longer a low-cost manufacturing hub. So those companies who still need a labor-intensive manufacturing, they are shifting to different developing countries like India and Vietnam for low labor cost. Another reason behind companies taking out investments from China, as it is not a democracy. Also, because of the economic growth, China's global military power is big concern for West in the US and Europe. Similarly, trade war, allegations on Chinese government over forced labor, child abuse in Xinjiang province of China and the disputes in South China Sea are making China's economy more unsafe and unstable. So future of China's economy will be very different. We would like to know from you who would replace China's position. Tell us in the comment section below.